Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to a very special bonus episode. For this bonus episode, to talk about Agile coaching, is our guest Rahul Bhattacharya. Hey Rahul, welcome back to the show.
Hey Vasco, thanks for inviting me for this chat. It's a pleasure to be back here on the Scrum Master Toolbox once again.
Absolutely. So Rahul also has his own podcast, the Agile Atelier. I'll put the link to the show notes so you can always find it easily. He's a very experienced Agile coach and Scrum Master, blending a rich experience in Agile methods with practical insights. And his approach emphasizes pragmatism and adaptability, focusing on impactful coaching strategies, nurturing continuous improvement, and learning in dynamic organizational environments. He's also the author of a recent book called Coaching Agile, a guide for Agile coaches and Scrum Masters to build and scale their coaching approach. The book we will be discussing in this episode, and we'll have a lot more insights about the book as we go. But first, Rahul, welcome back. You're a repeat guest. We've had the pleasure of having you previously on the show as well. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and why did you decide to write this book? What was the core problem that kind of motivated you to write Coaching Agile?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Vasco. Before I answer it, I also want to say a quick thank you to you, to your support, to your help, for your challenges, for collaborating with me over the past 6 years or so that we have known each other. So you've unknowingly contributed to this book. So heartfelt thank you on my behalf as well. Now happy to get into the question, right? So why did I write this book? What was the core problem I was trying to address? Well, I wrote this book from the perspective that I wish I had when I was starting off and working as an Agile coach, right? And now writing it from the perspective of someone who has gone through that same journey. So that core problem I was trying to address was having Agile coaches and Scrum Masters, rather than doing a random collection of different activities, facilitating here and there, maybe doing a workshop here and there, but rather to build a systemic approach for how to be successful and how to scale that success. So in the book, I'm sharing a bunch of different tips, practices, and things that have worked for me, as well as things that have not worked for me and the lessons I learned from it, to share with current and prospective Agile coaches to help them go through that journey themselves. So I want to share something that was framework agnostic, as you said in the introduction, for helping other people build an approach that really fits their context instead of asking them to do specific steps or follow a specific framework.
So, of course, the book will share all of those stories, but it's a lot more fun when we hear some of those difficult steps you went through and how you learned. So tell us one of those stories. What's your Agile coaching origin story? How did you even end up in that role?
Let me roll back the years. So, before I even got into the corporate world, I had the fortune of co-founding a couple of startups, one in the film industry, one in the wine industry. And the lessons that I'd learned from those startups really helped me when I, joined the corporate world. A lot of the things that were happening, a lot of the business processes, I was able to say, hold on, there could be a better way to do that. And there could be better ways to address it. So, I think that background that I was lucky enough to have in the startup world really helped challenge the status quo about why certain things work the way they do in different companies and think about ways to improve them. So after the startup scene, I joined a large organization as an analyst, learned project management, started doing the product manager role. And this is where I started making a lot of connections to how we were working in the startups to how we're working now within the scope of this business. So the agile ways made more sense to my background, right? They appealed a lot more in terms of what we were trying to achieve. So because of that, I went through the effort of getting some agile certifications. I helped implement some agile frameworks at the company that I was working at, in this product management role. So it was really supporting the organization put those first baby steps in place, right? And these steps were rather dogmatic, right? I will admit that, because I was new to the topic. I didn't have any past experience working with Scrum, working with different agile practices. But over time and with experience, I learned the value of the principles, right? And I don't think you can do that unless you really start by applying them, even though it might be dogmatic, right? Start by applying the framework, start by applying a lot of the ceremonies and things like that you find in Scrum, so that you can go through and formulate your own thoughts and beliefs about how you can tweak things, what could be a better way, why are we doing things a certain way.
And that's one of the things that I find many people get stuck on is like, I need to be perfect from the start. And as I used to tell my 5-year-old son at the time, 5-year-old, he was learning how to draw. You can't be good at anything if you first don't go through being bad at it, right? Like the sucking phase is a natural and necessary phase to be good at what we do. And if we are afraid of it to the point of not trying out new things, and you talked about being dogmatic, like if you work with a coach, they will help you to get out of that dogmatism. But before you try it, you have no reason to drop it, right? Because you say, hey, that is a much better way of doing it. Why are we doing it this way, which is ineffective, reduces communication, creates problems, whatever, right? Like going through that dogmatic phase is a necessary part of the learning. It can be accelerated with help, and reading this book, I'm sure, will give people a lot of insights as to why that is not a good idea. But if we're not ready to suck at something, we can't really be good at it either.
Exactly. And as the saying goes, failure is a key ingredient to success, right? So what I realized through the years is, I want to help people tackle the challenges that they face with the help of those principles that are mentioned in the Agile Manifesto, those that I've come up with that are important for me to use as a business coach, and the toolbox of practices, right? So we're here at the Scrum Master toolbox, right? I think that toolbox is a key part of it as well, so that you have exposure to different practices, frameworks, principles, and so on, so that you can understand when to use which ones and for which context. So in the book, Coaching Agile, I've included a large chunk of the exercises that I use in my day-to-day role, even to this day. And, when you go through the book, a lot of those templates are empty for you to fill out as a template. So I welcome you to write in the book, download the templates from my website, and use it in your day-to-day. At the end of the book, I also have a section for the templates appendix, which gives you a suggestion on how frequently to use some of those templates, diagrams, practices, and what context they could be used for. So take a look, and I hope it helps you in your day-to-day job as well.
Absolutely. And also remember that trying is a key part of learning, right? If we don't try it, we will never get better. So in the book, besides this, you also talk about the roles of Agile Coach and Scrum Master. And for me, what was interesting is the differentiation you make. So how do you differentiate the roles of Agile Coach and Scrum Master in practice? And why do you think it is important to do so?
Yeah, very simply, the Scrum Master role is a framework-specific role to Scrum, where you have 3 roles, right? And the Agile coaching role to me is a framework-agnostic role. So here I expect the individual to work with Scrum, work with Kanban, take practices from other frameworks. And the industry trend that I'm seeing for the past few years is to emphasize more value in people who could work with multiple frameworks, not just one, and apply practices and principles from the different frameworks for the different contexts that come up within an organization. So this is absolutely crucial to make those distinctions. Number one, to be clear about the role you're getting into, right? So it helps with expectation management. You don't come in thinking you're just going to support a team, conduct a retrospective, maybe help them improve their daily stand-ups, do the sprint reviews properly, and you join, and within the first couple of months, you realize that actually your manager wants you to, help implement lean metrics in another team than what you're supporting right now, right? So it helps you understand and gain clarity about the role you're getting into and set those expectations. And I talk about this in the first few chapters of the book to help people who are looking for such roles, agile coaching roles, Scrum Master roles in the market, and how you can distinguish between the two, but also what are some commonly seen jargon, vernacular that people use in interviews, in the job descriptions, and what they could indicate about the role or company culture. Even within agile coaching, I think there are different expectations, right? As you probably know, Vasco. So it's useful to talk about the roles and expectations, the success measures beyond just the title, because people can have different interpretations of them to get an idea of the challenge at hand.
And it is quite contextual, of course. And although what you said is absolutely true, the Scrum Master role is framework specific, and the Agile Coach role kind of emerged also from the fact that there were framework specific roles and we needed different roles. It is also a role that emphasizes the coaching part, which the Scrum Master is supposed to learn to be, but it isn't in the name, obviously. That fact that it is framework specific, or Scrum Master role is framework specific, is very important, and I think it's important for us to acknowledge. But one of the things that you also talk about, which is that we need to be able to adapt to the context, and even though they might use certain jargon in job descriptions, which is, of course, true, they will use certain jargon. That doesn't mean that the companies creating those job descriptions expect you to perform the exact same way that you expect a Scrum Master should perform, or that you expect an Agile Coach should perform. And I think that it's important for us as Agile Coaches and Scrum Masters to be able to dig into that during the interview as well. So do you talk about in the book on how to prepare for that, to learn from the interview process what are the expectations, rather than just what are, evident expectations by using certain role names?
Absolutely, I do. And this is mentioned in chapters 2, where I talk about interviewing in great detail, as well as chapter 3. So in my opinion, the role really starts during the interview process, right? This is where you're learning about the company context. You have the first touch points with your manager, some others who you might be working with, right? So you have to be able to, as you said, dig beneath jargon to understand really, what are they trying to achieve? What is the company trying to achieve with the aim of being agile? What are those challenges? How are they going to measure it? And work from there, right? So once you have a good idea of what they're trying to achieve, you can think about whether you have the right skills or whether you have the interest as well in working in such a role to help them achieve those things. During the interview process, you might realize that, hey, actually, what was written in the job description is actually very different from what they're talking about and the things that they're saying I would be required to do in the first few months of the job, right? So the book contains a lot of templates to help you think around some of these topics, think about the questions you can ask them, and encourages you to do your homework before the interview, to set yourself up for success when you start the role.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of our responsibility. Also setting expectations for us, right? Because it's not just what the expectations of the company are, but also what our expectations are. And there's nothing worse than going into a job that doesn't fit us. So it really should be a two-way street, that interview process. In the book, you also emphasize that Agile coaches need to be aware of what their products are, the product's market, understanding a lot more about the product side. And I know that you have a product background, so no surprise that you would include that there in the book as well. Tell us a little bit more about that thinking that you have, that you bring to your work, this product background that you have. How do you incorporate it into what you now look at the Agile coaching responsibilities or accountabilities?
Yeah. Look, at the end of the day, every organization and the teams that we are supporting in that organization as Agile coaches, as Scrum Masters, they're all building products or services, right? Some of those could be internal services, internal products, internal to the company. Yeah, some of those could be for the end user. Some of those could be for other organizations. Yeah. So having this understanding of what is a product or service, what is the product way, right? How can you build different products? How do you plan to do that within your company? I think adds a little more substance to the coaching that you're going to do, rather than being a person who's just pushing frameworks around and pushing practices around. We talked about the importance of contextualization at the beginning of this podcast. This helps with that, right? So if you can help people integrate a practice that you think would be useful for their context, having experience in doing that in the past, or having the background to speak the same language, to talk about how this can help the product develop, will allow you to be more successful in a coaching role. So I'll give you an example. There's no point trying to formulate a sprint goal if the team, for example, is given a list of components they need to build every week, right? Or a list of tasks that they need to deliver at the end of the week. You cannot formulate a sprint goal that, is an outcome that you want to achieve as a team, because the outputs or the list of tasks are fed to you and said, look, this is what you need to do. Don't need to think about the outcomes. This is the context that the team operates in. And, in such a case, if you have the space, or can create the space for being outcome driven, then it could be useful to include different discovery practices or talking with the customer. But really, you want to help them be efficient with delivering those things, right? So you can depend on some of the lean metrics I mentioned earlier, right? So cycle time, throughput, lead time, track how efficiently you are delivering those tasks. Think about what those metrics tell you. What parts of the process could you improve to deliver quicker, right? And quicker delivery also has the value of shortening the feedback loop with your customer. So the quicker you deliver, the quicker you can find out if you are delivering the right things or not, right? So that could be something that you add as a coach, even in this context. You say, okay, we've delivered the things that were asked. Now I wonder what kind of impact did it have, right? So what was the customer trying to do with these deliverables, and are they able to do it now? Yes or no, right? So you can still start thinking and start including that product-centric mindset into such contexts.
So you mentioned product-centric mindset, and as I heard you, I thought it is a little bit more than that, right? Like I was just, as I was listening to you, I was thinking that without that understanding, the understanding of the product, the market, the customers, we Agile coaches can't really have conversations about impact, right? We can only then have conversations about maybe feedback we got from customers or stakeholders, but we can't have conversations about impact. And that kind of starts to lead us into Agile coaches in the context of products and services. It starts to lead us into being also a little bit like product coaches, not necessarily doing product work, but being able to have that product conversation with the, of course, the product people, but also the team and even stakeholders. So what are the main things that you think, Rahul, that Agile coaches should be aware of and should know about being a little bit more like product coaches?
I think a great place to start is learning about the product itself, but also the people that operate within those products, right? So you mentioned the market and the customers, right? Why are we building this product? What sort of a job is this product doing for the end user? How is it helping make their lives better, right? So very fundamental things. Understanding those items helps you add more context about what you need to focus on in your coaching, right? If those things are unclear, people will not be able to have a good idea about the impact they're having. So you can incorporate those things into the coaching that you do. For example, let's say you're working with a team that's working with Scrum, yeah, and they're trying to understand who are the customers in this market that we operate in the European market, for example. What sort of preferences do we have? And depending on that, what are the types of features we need to build into the product to help them get to those preferences a little better? So you can start by working with a product designer if you have that in your organization. If you don't, you can learn about the product discovery practices that exist. Yeah. So one example of how I've incorporated this in my role with a previous client was running an offsite customer interview. This was actually done at an airport, and we, a team of 6 people and myself, we actually went to this airport. This was a company working in the airline industry, right? And during the sprint, we made time during a day to go to the airport to look at how the customers were interacting, what the check-in process was like, what sort of feedback they were giving to the person at the gate, checking the boarding passes. And along with that feedback, incorporating it into the planning for the next cycle, for the next quarter. So what are the things that we're seeing? What does this tell us about the things that we're building? So in this example, what we realized was the passengers had, a not so good idea about the updates, right? So sometimes the planes were moved to a different gate. Other times their boarding time was adjusted, right? So we worked with another team in the company, in this case, to use that feedback to improve the flight updates in the app that we had. So incorporating time for those customer touch points outside of a company was really crucial for this team, for this organization. And then they started doing things like including customer interactions in the sprint reviews, right? So the representative from the sales, from tech, from product, and these different roles, they got together into a session, had a number of volunteers come through, use their app, and see what were things that were challenging, what were things that were working well. So it's really important to get out of the ivory tower, to get out of your organization, to where the action and the interaction is happening with the customer, so that you can de-risk that increment that you're building during your sprints and add more customer and business value.
I really like that perspective of taking the going to where the customers are and observing them firsthand and trying to understand what are people struggling with, and therefore also understand what might be better ideas and have that conversation about impact. Now, we talked about product impact, and that's one of the key aspects I think we need to be aware of working with products or services. But there's another type of impact which Agile coaches need to be aware of and even be ready to talk about, which is the impact of Agile coaching itself, right? So this is a very common question. How do we, a question that I get at least, how do we show the value of Agile coaching? How do we measure the impact? So the question back to you, Rahul, how do you suggest organizations measure the impact that Agile coaching has on their performance?
Yeah, that's a very important topic, right? And something you should address upfront as early as you can. So how do organizations do this, or how would I suggest them to do this? Firstly, have clarity and agreement on what you expect agility to help you with in your organizations, right? So there are a number of companies that I've supported in the past that say, yes, we want to be more agile, right? So you need to dig deeper. What does this mean? why are you trying to be more agile, right? What do you expect to do with the help of agility? So understand what is the end to which the means of agility can be expected to help. Once you have those conversations, I think that's a great launching pad for you to then ask them about what are those qualitative and quantitative measures of success from there. So in our line of work, right, we should prioritize a lot of the qualitative feedback as well. So not just looking at things like how quickly are we able to help the team deliver, but then also what sort of environment are we creating? Are we helping decisions not just be quicker, but also be made easier, right, in a better fashion? So the qualitative feedback you can get through 360 conversations, right? So if an agile coach is working with the team, you can get feedback from the team members, from the team leads, perhaps from other agile coaches in the team, that this person may have had touch points with. So it's important to really have the quantitative and quantitative metrics in there. I'll give you an example, right? Let's say you start working with a team that says, hey, we want to be agile, and you ask them, why, right? What does this mean to you when you say you want to be agile? They say, oh, we want to deliver faster. Okay, so that we can get those short feedback loops, get feedback faster, and so on. I say, okay, so you want to deliver faster. How will you know if you're delivering faster, right? So you can look at things like throughput, cycle time, flow, and use that as the quantitative metrics, and then get the conversational feedback from the team. Are they still operating while they're trying to speed up the delivery in a way that's healthy, right? Are they still having fun at work? Are they still having nice interactions with their peers? I talk about a model in Coaching Agile in the book called the needs-oriented model of coaching. And there I outline the three things that are crucial to assessing impact and how you want to do the work. The one is the client layers, right? So in an organization, you have the organization itself, the different teams. So I think of as well departments as a collection of teams, the individuals that make up those teams, and yourself as a client layers. You can have different levels of impact across those different client layers, and they have their own needs oftentimes. So the other part of the model here is the outward in approach, where you want to apply systemic thinking to think about the context you operate in first within the company, and then support the different client layers to think about, okay, how can we achieve what is the company vision, right? What does that mean for the individual team? What does that mean for you as an individual software developer? How can you support them? And then lastly, there's a quadrant of needs that talks about not just successive measures of success for the product, but also the process. How do you know if your process is setting you up to deliver value, whatever that may be? So thinking around these different topics can help you drill down on how to go from something qualitative, such as deliver faster, into more specific actions that the team can take to get there.
And one of the key aspects of this is to understand what are we trying to deliver faster, right? So you talked about one key aspect, which is the quantitative metrics. Is it throughput? Is it cycle time? What are we trying to get faster? Because even just faster is too generic, right? Like it's not specific enough. But then also to think about, okay, but if we deliver a lot of things faster that nobody wants, like, is that valuable? Like, and this is a conversation we need to have, right? So it's very important, as you said, to dig deeper beyond what being agile might be the term, or being faster might be the term that people use, but we need to dig deeper to understand, because if we don't, we can't really measure impact. And for me, one key aspect of that is that when we understand what the company is trying to do, we can suggest different things to try. But if everything that we have is like this, deliver faster, then there's very little things we can do, right? Especially because very often we come into teams that are already overworked. They have a completely oversized backlog of loads of things that are not necessary, but they are there and they must be delivered because they have been promised. They are in the quote unquote roadmap, which usually is more like a project plan than it is a roadmap, right? So it's very important for us to dig deeper and to understand not only what does that mean, but also to try to understand what are the levers, right? Like, okay, so if we are faster, but we don't deliver value, is that a good thing? And if not, then what does value mean in this organization? How are you measuring value, right? Because if we end up in the discussion that more value means just more stories, then you know that you're not talking about value anymore. You're talking about quantity of work. And in that case, there's a very simple strategy. You just make stories very, very small. And there's many strategies we can go so that we make the story small. And that's not a bad thing at all, because that increases the speed of feedback and we will more easily and more quickly find what is not working, right? So, but it's very important to have that context, not just, okay, yes, we need to be faster, yes, we need to be agile, but what does that mean right there at that moment?
Yeah, absolutely. And you need to meet them where they are, right? So you can't just go in with the mindset of, hey, I'm going to put in what good Scrum looks like from my perspective, regardless of what your goals as a team, as a company are, right? If you do that, you're setting yourself up for failure. And I've done this in the past. And again, going back to, starting with something, starting with dogma, even it may be, and going from there, right? Thinking about, okay, why did this not work? How can I change my approach next time so that I can help them achieve their goals, but at the same time, move them in a direction where they're more, outcome oriented in their planning and their thinking, right? How can we go from one step to the other without trying to aim for the moonshot in the first try?
So I have a not so easy question for you following on from this, of course, because we are talking about measuring impact and of course also measuring progress, because that's very often one of the impact aspects that team coaches working with teams need to go through. Progress is also impact from the perspective of stakeholders. But there's different types of mindset when it comes to measuring and even defining what progress is, right? I've been personally very vocal about how the project management mindset can create problems for agile organizations. And some of those agile organizations you and I have seen completely go back to old school waterfall-centric project management. So in the book, you also take this, I think, risky approach of talking about balancing the traditional project management approach with agility. And I wanted to explore that with you here. So what do you mean when you talk about balancing agility with traditional project management approaches?
Yeah, I think there are contexts where those two approaches can feed into one another, right? So it's not to say that this is project management and agility is separate. So I think there can be contexts where agility can be helpful in different project settings and vice versa, where project-oriented thinking can help you be agile, right? So let's take the example of compliance regulated industry. Let's say you're working for a company that produces drugs, right? A large manufacturer of drugs. In such settings, you have to have upfront project planning, right? For things like what is the defined scope, what is the expected cost, what is the time, right? And you need these things to have the budget approval from the agency that's going to pay you to do these things, to do the research, to do the project. Yeah, so that's absolutely necessary. If you say, hey, we don't know how long this is going to take, or we aren't really sure exactly about the scope, we'll find out along the way, that will basically mean that you don't have funding for the projects and you don't even have the chance to discover what those things may be. Yeah, so in that case, you start with that upfront plan, but you leave it open as well for changes in between. So within this kind of more waterfall-y project, each phase of that project can then include agile practices, agile principles, right? So let's say you have a very broad SLA that you've defined, service level agreement that you've defined for the project. And you say, we expect, 68% of the drugs to be manufactured by October from the 3-4 categories that we have. You don't say what those ratios might be between each of those drugs. You don't talk about efficacy and all these things, right? But you keep it broad. And this is called rolling wave planning, right? This is, I think, where project management and agile mindsets can support one another, where within those defined SLAs, you can then set up customer trials, right? So you're including things like product discovery in this very old school waterfall-y way of working. And you're getting feedback from the customers about, hey, what is the efficacy of this drug? Should we increase the ratio of it in the overall deliverables? Should we decrease the ratio of this drug, right? Because we haven't committed to what that ratio will be, so we can play around a little bit. So while you're going through this project, you can tweak and fine-tune those service level agreements. And these feedback loops that you establish within this waterfall project helps you be a little more agile and define those specific deliverables while you're going through it, right? So, I've supported a few companies in such industries where it's, regulatory, you have to define a bunch of things up front. And what's important to do in those contexts is be clear, be as blurry as you can up front. Yeah? So you're not setting yourself up for failure. And then as you go on, see if you can fine tune it based on the learnings that you have over the course of your project. And obviously, in highly complex environments where you can't predict things up front, like in tech industries, right? Like in software development, this is where a lot of the waterfall project management upfront planning does not make sense, as you know, right? So this is where we can then take the more product-centric agile mindsets and go from there. So
I like what you talk about when you mentioned that let's look for where agile can help traditional planning, and let's look for where traditional planning can help agile. And I think that perspective that, okay, so could I find something here in traditional project management where agile could come in and be of help? And I think that perspective can be very productive and can be very constructive as well. And I've worked with many project managers, and I guarantee project managers are the most agile people because they know project management doesn't work as expected, right? They are there. They have the day-to-day experience. And that ability to adapt is within them. But of course, when you have a lot of fixed and upfront expectations and are not ready to change them, that's where things go wrong. And I think that, as you said, agile can come in and help with that, right? Like, for example, delay commitment is one of the principles from Lean Agile software development, the last responsible moment, as it was called back then. But delaying commitment is a very agile approach that can be very, very helpful, even in highly regulated environments. For example, flying airplanes, right? There are specific processes in flying airplanes that pertain all kinds of aspects, like what to do in case of a storm, what to do when you don't have a slot, what to do when there's something in the airport that was not predicted, that like all of that is already specified up front, right? But they also have very agile concepts within that framework, like the last responsible moment to make a decision, right? You don't try to commit the whole flight plan ahead of time, even though you need to have a flight plan before you even get off the gate. Right. And I think that thinking can be very productive. So I like that idea of looking for where project management can help agile and looking for where agile can help project management. So one last question, Rahul. And of course, for all of you out there, the book is called Coaching Agile. We'll put the link to all the usual locations where you can find the book so that you can go and check it out and buy it. But I do have one question that is a question that I ask all of my guests during 2024. And the question pertains to the future of Agile. So picture the future, right? Like we are right now, this is what we know. Right? Whatever we know now is what Agile is, which is quite different from what it was in the end of the 90s, early 2000s. We've taken the practices all the way up to 11, as suggested in that Spinal Tap documentary and also a big part of XP, right? Like everything good turn the good up, as Woody Zuill very often says. So what do you think Agile will look like in the future when we push the current practices, the good practices that are all out there, all the way up to 11? If you do that exercise in your mind, what does Agile look like?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know if all the current practices are at 11, all right, or if they're at 10, or what that number is right now. My view on this is, I think we need to revisit the principles, right? Those decision-making heuristics that help us formulate what are those practices, because there, I hope, will be some new practices that come up over the years about defining what is Agile, and where it's going to take us. So, I would start by revisiting those principles. What are the things that are important for you to make decisions on to improve in your current context as a business, as a team, as an Agile coach? And when you can answer those questions creatively, taking inspiration from other industries, taking inspiration from other settings, other contexts, I think that's how you take the practices all the way up to 11. Based on those principles, you can then define practices that are not yet defined, that are maybe a bit old and outdated, but you can tweak something there to make it better, right? And at the end of the day, like we preach, we must always check, by carrying out these practices, what sort of impact is it having in the world? Is it, are those principles helping us deliver more value to the business, to the customers outside the business? If not, do we need to revisit those principles, or can we change some of the practices to help us do that better?
Absolutely. Always use the principles, don't get stuck in practices, and always check the impact. I like that. Rahul, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Before we go, where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
You can go on my website, agile-atelier.com. And that has links to everything that I do. The podcast that you mentioned, Vasco, I haven't had a guest on in a while, as I was busy writing this book, but I hope to pick that back up pretty soon. I also do have a blog there. You can connect with me on LinkedIn through there as well. So everything's centralized on my website there.
All right, absolutely. We'll put the link to those on the show notes for people to find them easy. Rahul, thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Thank you, Vasco. It's been a pleasure.
We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.